The water didn't just glow, it sang. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears, not really. It was a deep, resonant hum that vibrated right through the thin hull of my kayak and into my bones, a physical presence in the dead quiet of the night. Below me, the inky blackness of the lake was alive with a soft, shifting constellations of blue-green light, mirroring the stars above in a way that felt ancient and impossible. I dipped my paddle into the water, and for a moment it was like stirring a galaxy with a spoon. A swirl of liquid light followed the blade, ethereal and silent. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the deep, celestial bass of the lake. I had been chasing ghosts for years, but I had never, ever found something like this. This wasn't a ghost. This was a god. This is a new channel with incredible stories every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. To understand how I ended up in a kayak in the middle of a glowing, singing lake miles from any known civilization, you need to know a little about me. My name is Alex. I'm 28, and by day, I was a software developer. I sat in a gray cubicle, under the flat, sterile glare of fluorescent lights, and wrote code that helped companies sell things people didn't need. It was a good job. A stable job. It paid the bills. And it was slowly, quietly draining the life out of me. My world was becoming pixels and algorithms, a digital abstraction of reality that felt increasingly hollow. So I had a secret life. On weekends, I became someone else. I was an explorer of forgotten places. I'd take my camera, a backpack full of gear, and I would hunt for the ruins of the modern world, abandoned hospitals, decaying factories, forgotten amusement parks. I wasn't a vandal. I was a historian of the overlooked, a photographer of decay. My motto was simple: take only pictures, leave only footprints. In those quiet, dusty places, I felt a sense of peace, a connection to something real. It was in these circles, on obscure forums, and in hushed conversations with other explorers, that I first heard the whisper. It wasn't a place, really. It was a myth. They called it the sunken forest, or the drowned valley. The story changed with every telling. Some said it was a valley in the Pacific Northwest that was flash flooded a century ago, perfectly preserving an old-growth forest beneath the surface of a crystal-clear lake. Others said it was a government experiment gone wrong. Most people dismissed it as a campfire story. But one old explorer, a man whose work I deeply respected, sent me a private message. It contained nothing but a single grainy satellite image and a set of coordinates. The image showed a strange, teardrop-shaped lake nestled in a valley so remote it was a blank spot on most maps, surrounded by impenetrable mountains. There were no roads, no towns, nothing. The coordinates pointed to the heart of that blank spot. The message had one line of text.
Go, but go respectfully.
That was all the push I needed. I took a 2-week vacation from my soul-crushing job, packed my 4x4 with camping gear, climbing equipment, and my inflatable kayak, and drove north for 3 days. The last 100 miles were a nightmare of crumbling logging roads and washed-out bridges. I had to abandon the truck and hike the final 20 miles. The air grew cooler, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my boots and the cry of a distant hawk. It felt like walking off the edge of the world. And then I saw it. I crested a ridge, and the valley opened up below me, exactly like the satellite photo. It was breathtaking. The lake was a sheet of polished obsidian, perfectly still, and rising from its depths were the tops of colossal trees, ancient redwoods or firs, their skeletal gray branches reaching for the sky like the arms of drowned giants. The sunken forest was real. I spent the rest of the day setting up a small, hidden camp near the shore, my excitement, a live wire buzzing inside me. The place had an atmosphere I couldn't quite describe. It wasn't just peaceful, it was watchful. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of violet and rose, I inflated my kayak and pushed out onto the water. The silence was even more profound out on the lake. The drowned trees slid past me like ancient monoliths, their reflections trailing in my wake. It was beautiful, but also deeply eerie. That's when I noticed the first anomaly. Tucked into the crook of a massive, half-submerged branch was a small object. I paddled closer. It was a bird, carved from a single piece of dark wood with a skill and artistry that was breathtaking. It wasn't old or weathered, it looked new. My blood ran cold. Who would come all this way to leave a piece of art in a place no one ever visits? Then I saw a second sign. A thin, almost invisible wisp of smoke, rising from the dense forest on the far side of the lake. A campfire. My explorer's brain went into overdrive. A squatter? A lost hiker? The logical explanations felt thin. No one could get here by accident. I paddled towards the smoke, my curiosity overriding my caution. I beached the kayak and hid it in some thick brush before moving into the forest. The trees here were different from the drowned ones, alive and impossibly tall, their canopy so thick it blotted out the last of the dying light. I found a path. It wasn't a deer trail. It was intentionally cleared, wide enough for two people to walk abreast. This was the first real twist, the moment the mystery deepened from a natural wonder to a human puzzle. I was no longer just exploring a forgotten place. I was trespassing. I followed the path for what felt like a mile, my senses on high alert. The smell of wood smoke grew stronger, now mingled with the scent of something savory, like roasting herbs and meat. I heard a sound, the soft murmur of voices. I crouched behind a massive fern and peered through the leaves, and my world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a camp, it was a village. A small, impossible village of perhaps 30 or 40 homes, built directly into the living trees and the hillside. The architecture was like nothing I'd ever seen. Organic, flowing structures of wood and stone, with living moss for roofs and bridges woven from living branches connecting the higher dwellings. Lanterns, glowing with a soft, warm light, hung from posts. People moved between the buildings, their clothing simple, homespun fabrics of green and brown. They were families. Children chased each other across a central green, their laughter echoing softly in the twilight. It felt like I had stumbled through a tear in time, into a lost world. I was so mesmerized, I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until it was too late. A hand clamped down on my shoulder, strong and unyielding. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Two men stood there, their faces grim. They were tall and lean, dressed in the same simple clothes as the villagers, and they held sturdy-looking wooden staves. They didn't look angry. They looked sad and resolute. Before I could say a word, one of them spoke, his voice low and steady.
You should not have come here.
They led me into the village. No one shouted or pointed. They just watched me with a quiet, unnerving solemnity. I was brought to the largest structure, a communal hall built around the base of a colossal, ancient tree. Inside, a council of elders sat waiting, their faces etched with the wisdom and worry of generations. The man who sat in the center was clearly the leader. His hair was white as snow, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. He introduced himself as Kale. He radiated an authority that was absolute. They took my backpack. They gently, but firmly, confiscated my phone, my GPS, and my camera. As Kale held my camera in his hands, turning it over and over, he didn't look at it with curiosity, but with a kind of profound dread, as if he were holding a weapon.
What is your purpose in this place?
He asked, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel. I tried to explain. I told them about my hobby, my search for beauty in forgotten places. I told them I meant no harm, that I would leave and never speak of what I'd seen. He listened patiently, his eyes never leaving mine. When I was finished, he simply shook his head.
The world you come from does not forget.
He said,
A secret, once spoken, is a bird let loose from a cage. It can never be put back.
I was, for all intents and purposes, their prisoner. But it was the strangest captivity imaginable. I was given a small, comfortable room in one of the dwellings. I was fed, treated with a quiet courtesy, but I was never left alone. One of the two men who found me was always nearby. They were waiting, debating my fate. It was during this time that I met her. Her name was Alara. She was one of the younger members of the community, maybe a few years younger than me. She was assigned to bring me my meals. Unlike the others, whose faces were closed and wary, Alara's held a spark of undisguised curiosity. She had deep green eyes and a way of moving that was both graceful and strong. She asked me questions about my world, about the cities of light, the metal birds that flew in the sky, the glowing screens that held all the world's knowledge. I tried to describe my life, and hearing it out loud in this timeless natural place, it sounded absurd and artificial. She, in turn, began to tell me about her home. They called themselves the Keepers. Their ancestors had come to this valley centuries ago, fleeing a great war and a sickness that had ravaged the outside world. They found sanctuary here, protected by the valley's isolation. They had lived here in secret ever since, preserving a way of life that was in perfect harmony with the forest. But they weren't just hiding, they were guarding something. Ilara was hesitant to explain what it was.
It is not a thing to be explained,
She said one evening, her brow furrowed in concentration.
It must be felt.
Kale, however, remained a wall of granite. I saw him watching me, his expression unreadable. He saw me as a contamination, a virus from a world they had fought for generations to keep at bay. He believed the only safe solution was to make me forget. Ilara told me they had herbal concoctions, rituals that could cloud the mind and erase specific memories. The thought terrified me more than any physical threat. To have seen this, to have felt this place, and then to have it stolen from my own mind felt like a fate worse than death. The community was divided. The younger ones, like Ilara, were curious. They argued that my arrival could be a sign, a chance to learn. The older ones, led by Kale, saw only risk. After a week, I was brought before the council again. They had made their decision. Or rather, they were about to. They sat in a silent circle, the firelight flickering on their serious faces. Kale was arguing for the path of forgetting. Ilara was making a quiet, passionate plea for trust. They were deciding whether to erase a part of my soul, or to trust me with the greatest, most beautiful secret I had ever known. And in that moment, I have to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have argued for your freedom, tried to escape? Or would you have stayed silent and put your faith in the kindness of a stranger, like Ilara? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. I chose to speak. I didn't plead. I didn't bargain. I looked at Kale and the other elders, and I spoke from the heart. I told them that I understood their fear. I told them that my world often did destroy beautiful things by trying to possess them. But I also told them that not everyone in my world was like that some of us were still searching for the magic they lived with every day. I promised them with every fiber of my being that their secret would be safe with me. I don't know if my words made a difference, but Ilara's did. She proposed a test.
Let him see,
She said to the council.
Let him see the chorus. If his heart is true, he will understand. If it is not, then his understanding will not matter, and you can do what you must.
Kale stared at me for a long, hard moment, his eyes searching for something. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire forest, he nodded. Just once. That night, Ilara took me back to the lake. She didn't lead me to my hidden kayak, but to one of their own, a sleek, dark canoe that cut through the water like a whisper. She paddled us out into the center of the lake, into the heart of the sunken forest. We sat in silence as the last light faded, and the stars began to prick the velvet canvas of the sky.
Just watch
She whispered.
and listen.
And then it began. It started with a single, low note, a hum that seemed to emanate from one of the giant, drowned trees. Then another joined in, a slightly different pitch. And another, until the entire forest was vibrating with a complex, unearthly harmony. It was the sound I had heard on my first night, but now it was a full symphony. And as the sound swelled, the light began. A single fungus growing on the bark of a submerged tree began to glow with a soft blue light. Then another and another, triggered by the specific resonant frequency of the wood. The lights weren't random. They flickered and pulsed in time with the song of the trees. Soon, the entire lake was a living map of light and sound. Ilara explained that the valley's unique geology and magnetic fields interacted with the ancient trees and a species of bioluminescent fungus found nowhere else on Earth. The trees didn't just sing, they were playing the song of the Earth itself. The patterns of light on the water weren't just beautiful, they were a celestial calendar, a map of the seasons and the stars, a direct communion with the natural world. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I felt tears streaming down my face, not of sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming awe. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a village or a natural phenomenon. It was a sacred place, a church with a canopy of leaves and a choir of ancient trees. I looked at Ilara, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow from the water, and I knew that I would protect this place with my life. Hope blossomed in my chest. I spent the next few days with Ilara, learning. She showed me which plants were for medicine, which roots were for dye. I helped prepare a footbridge, my clumsy knots looking foolish next to their elegant woven ones. I was beginning to feel a sense of belonging, a quiet joy I hadn't felt in years. But Kale's shadow was always there. One afternoon, he found me by the lake shore, skipping stones across the glassy surface. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he told me a story about another outsider, a botanist who had stumbled into the valley 50 years ago. They had trusted him, too. He had seemed kind, respectful. He stayed for a summer, studied their ways, and promised to keep their secret. A year later, a helicopter appeared in the sky. It was a survey team from a logging company. The botanist had sold the location of the untouched old-growth forest for a small fortune. The keepers had managed to frighten them away, using their intimate knowledge of the forest to create illusions, making the valley seem unstable and treacherous. But it was a close call. The betrayal had scarred them, reinforcing the walls around their hidden world.
He had a box like yours.
Kale said, his eyes hard as flint, referring to my camera.
He said he only wanted to capture the beauty. But a picture is a map, a key. You say you will protect us, but you are the key to our destruction walking in our midst.
His words hit me like a physical blow. I realized he wasn't a villain. He was a guardian, burdened by a terrible responsibility. From his perspective, I was a ticking bomb. My very existence here was a betrayal of his duty. The hope I had felt curdled into a cold dread. I understood that this wasn't my adventure story. I was the crisis. The heavens seemed to agree. That night, the mother of all storms rolled into the valley. The sky turned a bruised purple-black. Wind howled through the trees, a sound of pure fury. Rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. The lake churned into a gray, frothing monster. Then, a sound louder than thunder cracked through the air, followed by a splintering groan that shook the very ground. A bolt of lightning had struck the sentinel, the oldest and largest tree in the living forest, the one around which the main hall was built. It was the lead singer of the chorus, the heart of their community. A massive fissure had split its trunk, and the entire, colossal tree was leaning precariously towards the village. If it fell, it would trigger a landslide, wiping out a dozen homes. The keepers rushed out into the storm, their faces pale with terror. They had ropes and braces, their traditional methods for securing trees, but the sentinel was too big, the damage too severe. They were losing. I saw Kale directing his people, his voice strained, his face a mask of desperation. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. This was no longer their problem. It was ours. I remembered the climbing gear in my pack, the carabiners, the pulleys, the high tensile strength rope designed to hold thousands of pounds of force. It was modern technology, the very thing they feared, but it could help. I ran to the dwelling where my things were kept and grabbed the gear. I found Kale in the driving rain.
I can help.
I yelled over the wind.
I know about leverage, about anchor points. We can create a pulley system to take the strain off.
He looked at me, then at my strange, brightly colored gear, his face a torrent of conflict. For a second, I thought he would refuse. But then he looked at the groaning tree and the terrified faces of his people, and he gave a sharp, desperate nod. What followed was a blur of frantic, focused work. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was a part of a team, fighting for our home. I showed them how to set up a Z-drag, a complex pulley system used in mountain rescue to multiply force. They, with their innate understanding of the trees, found the strongest anchor points. We worked together, shouting instructions over the storm, our hands raw, our bodies soaked and shivering. Kale and I were side by side, pulling on the same rope, our breath misting in the cold air. There was no suspicion in his eyes now, only a shared, desperate goal. We looped ropes around the massive trunk, anchored them to other giants, and slowly, painstakingly, began to pull the sentinel back from the brink. It was a battle of inches, a fight against gravity and time. And then, with a final, collective heave, the groaning stopped. The trees settled, held fast by a web of their traditional ropes and my modern ones. It was secure. As the first light of dawn broke, the storm receded, leaving behind a world washed clean and trembling. We stood there, exhausted, muddy, but together. The sentinel was scarred, but it was standing. The village was safe. The feeling of that moment, of teamwork and shared survival, of earning that trust not with words, but with action, is something I will never ever forget. If these kinds of deep human stories are what you're looking for, consider subscribing before we get to the end. It helps more than you know. A few days later, as I was sitting by the now calm and quiet lake, Cale approached me. He sat beside me, and for a long time we just watched the drowned trees. He didn't apologize, his pride wouldn't allow that. But he didn't need to. He handed me my camera.
The botanist took pictures of us,
He said, his voice quiet.
to show others what he had found. You seem to see what we see.
He paused.
Take pictures for its time, for our children's children. Capture the light, capture the song, but leave the faces to memory.
He then gave me a choice. It was the hardest choice of my life. I could leave. They would pack me supplies and guide me back to the edge of their world. They trusted me now. I was free to go, to return to my life, carrying their secret in my heart. Or, he said, I could stay. I could become one of them. I could learn the song of the forest, trade my keyboard for a carving knife, my digital world for a real one. I stood there, on the shore of that impossible lake, with my camera in one hand. I looked at the path that led out of the valley, back to my car, my job, my old life. Then I looked back at the village, nestled in the trees. I saw Ilara, standing in the doorway of the great hall, watching me, a hopeful, gentle smile on her face. I had come here searching for something real, and I had found the realest thing in the world. I had to choose between two lives, two versions of myself. The man who documents the world, or the man who lives in it. I made my choice, and every day I live with it. Have you ever faced a choice that could completely change the entire course of your life? What would you have chosen? The path back to everything you've ever known, or the leap into a beautiful, terrifying unknown? I still have the photos, and the memories. They are my most treasured possessions. Share your thoughts or theories in the comments. I read all of them.